Hashtag it's payback time. Jacob Fatu returns with vengeance and destroys Drew McIntyre on WWE War Games. Drew McIntyre should have seen it coming. He should have felt the storm gathering on the horizon. He should have heard the whispers in the locker room. He should have known that when you mess with the bloodline, when you disrespect the Samoan dynasty, when you put your hands on family, someone is going to make you pay. And at War Games, Jacob Fatu didn't just return. He didn't just make an appearance. He didn't just show up to stand in solidarity with his brothers. No, Jacob Fatu came back to obliterate, to annihilate, to send a message so brutal, so devastating, so absolutely earth-shattering that Drew McIntyre is probably still feeling it in his bones right now as you're watching this video. This wasn't a wrestling match. This was an execution. This was justice served with a steel cage wrapped around it, with violence as the main course, and with Drew McIntyre's broken body as the dessert. And if you missed it, if you blinked, if you looked away for even a second during War Games, then buckle up, because what you're about to hear is going to blow your mind, shake your understanding of what vengeance looks like in professional wrestling, and make you question whether Drew McIntyre will ever be the same again. Let's rewind the clock. Let's go back to where this nightmare began for the Scottish Warrior. Because you don't just wake up one morning and find yourself on the receiving end of Jacob Fatu's fury without earning it, without planting the seeds, without watering them with your arrogance, your disrespect, and your absolute refusal to understand that some lines, you just don't cross. Drew McIntyre thought he was untouchable. He thought that his size, his power, his legacy in WWE gave him the right to do whatever he wanted, say whatever he wanted, attack whoever he wanted. The Scottish Warrior walked around with that Claymore kick loaded like a weapon of mass destruction, believing that intimidation alone would keep him safe, that his reputation would shield him from consequences. But here's what Drew forgot. Here's what he failed to understand in his quest for dominance and respect. The bloodline doesn't forget. The bloodline doesn't forgive. And the bloodline? They don't just get even. They get ahead. For months, Drew McIntyre had been circling the bloodline like a hungry predator, targeting Roman Reigns, going after Solo Sikoa, inserting himself into family business that had nothing to do with him, running his mouth about Samoan dynasties, about tribal chiefs, about bloodlines and legacies like he had any right to speak on matters of family and heritage. He mocked them. He challenged them. He attacked them when their backs were turned. Drew McIntyre played a dangerous game, thinking he could poke the bear and walk away unscathed, thinking that his battles with Roman, his wars with the Usos, his confrontations with Solo Sikoa would just be another chapter in his already legendary career. What Drew didn't account for, what he couldn't have seen coming, was the silent warrior waiting in the shadows, Jacob Fatu, the Samoan werewolf, the most dangerous, most unpredictable, most violent member of the bloodline. And Drew? Drew had no idea what was about to hit him. Question for you right now: did Drew McIntyre deserve what happened to him at War Games? Drop your answer in the comments. Now let's talk about War Games itself. If you've never experienced War Games, if you've never felt the electricity in the arena when that second cage lowers, when the weapons get introduced, when the match goes from wrestling to warfare, then you need to understand something. War Games isn't just a match. It's not just two teams fighting inside steel. War Games is where careers end, where legends are born, where blood is spilled not for entertainment, but for survival. The cage doesn't just keep competitors in, it keeps mercy out. And when that cage door locked at War Games, when Drew McIntyre found himself trapped inside with the bloodline, with nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, no escape route and no backup plan, that's when the realization must have hit him like a freight train. That's when the color must have drained from his face. That's when Drew McIntyre understood that he wasn't walking out of this cage the same man who walked in. The match was chaos from the opening bell. Bodies flying, weapons crashing, the crowd erupting with every near fall, every suplex onto steel chairs, every head meeting cage wall with that sickening thud that makes you wince even through your TV screen. Drew was fighting like a man possessed, landing Claymore kicks, throwing bodies around like they weighed nothing. The Scottish Warrior was in full combat mode, doing everything in his power to survive, to overcome, to prove that he belonged in this environment. For a moment, just a moment, it looked like Drew might actually pull it off. He had Roman Reigns reeling. Solo Sikoa was down. The Usos were tangled up with Drew's teammates on the other side of the ring. Drew was standing tall, chest heaving, sweat pouring, looking around the cage like he had conquered the unconquerable. That's when the lights went out. That's when the arena exploded. That's when the music hit. And that's when Jacob Fatu emerged from the darkness like a demon summoned from the deepest pits of wrestling hell itself. Let me paint you a picture of Jacob Fatu. This isn't just another big man. This isn't just another powerhouse who can throw people around. Jacob Fatu is 6 feet 1 inch of pure Samoan fury wrapped in 285 pounds of muscle, violence, and vendetta. He moves like someone half his size. He hits like someone twice his weight. And when Jacob Fatu decides that you're going to suffer, when he makes up his mind that your name is on his hit list, brother, you better make peace with your God, because Jacob Fatu is about to introduce you to pain on a level you didn't know existed. The man has a moonsault that defies physics, a hip attack that sent opponents to the hospital, and a mean streak that makes even the most hardened veterans take a step back when he enters a room. This is the Samoan werewolf, the enforcer that the Bloodline keeps in reserve for when things need to get serious. And at War Games, things just got deadly serious. Jacob Fatu's entrance was like watching a natural disaster in human form descend upon the ring. The cage rattled with his presence. The steel groaned under the weight of his fury. And Drew McIntyre? Drew McIntyre's eyes went wide, because in that moment, Drew realized something that should have been obvious from the start. You can fight the Bloodline. You can challenge the Bloodline. You can even beat the Bloodline on a good night with luck on your side. But you cannot escape the Bloodline. And you sure as hell cannot escape what's coming when Jacob Fatu has been unleashed with one singular purpose: make you pay. Here's a question for the real ones: would you step in the ring with Jacob Fatu if you knew what was coming? Yes or no in the comments. What happened next wasn't wrestling, it was a mauling. Jacob Fatu entered that cage like a heat-seeking missile locked onto Drew McIntyre's location. No showboating, no posturing, no dramatic speeches or threats. Just pure, unfiltered, unstoppable violence. Fatu grabbed Drew by the throat before the Scottish warrior could even process what was happening. One massive hand wrapped around Drew's neck, lifting him like he weighed nothing, and then, boom! Samoan dropped directly onto a steel chair that had been propped up in the corner. The sound echoed through the arena like a gunshot. Drew's body folded like an accordion, and the crowd gasped because they knew, this was just the beginning. Jacob Fatu wasn't here to win a match. Jacob Fatu was here to send Drew McIntyre to the Shadow Realm. Drew tried to fight back. Give him credit for that. The man's a warrior. He threw everything he had left in his arsenal at Fatu. Headbutts, forearms, even managed to create some separation and went for a desperation claymore kick. But Jacob Fatu? He caught Drew's boot mid-air, held it there for a moment while making eye contact with the Scottish warrior, and you could see it in Drew's eyes. Fear. Pure, unfiltered, oh my God, what have I done? Fear. Fatu smiled. Not a happy smile. Not a playful smile. The smile of a predator who has his prey exactly where he wants them. And then he pulled Drew in. Pop-up Samoan drop. Drew's body crashed into the canvas with so much force that the entire ring shook. Referees flinched. Commentators stopped talking. The crowd went from roaring to stunned silence because they had just witnessed something that looked more like a car crash than a wrestling move. But Jacob Fatu wasn't done. Not even close. You have to understand something about the Bloodline's mentality. When they decide someone needs to be taught a lesson, they don't just beat you. They don't just pin you for the 3 count. They erase you. They make an example out of you. They turn you into a cautionary tale that echoes through the WWE locker room for years to come. And Drew McIntyre? Drew had disrespected the family, disrespected the legacy, disrespected everything the Bloodline stands for. So Jacob Fatu was going to make sure that Drew and everyone watching understood the price of that disrespect. Fatu dragged Drew's lifeless body to the corner, propped him up against the cage wall like a rag doll, backed up to the opposite corner. The crowd started to buzz. They knew what was coming. They'd seen Jacob Fatu do this before. They knew the devastation that was about to unfold. But knowing it's coming and seeing it happen? Two completely different things. Jacob Fatu charged across the ring like a runaway train. That devastating hip attack, the move that's hospitalized competitors, that's ended matches in seconds, that's become synonymous with pure destruction. He launched his entire 285-pound frame, hips first, directly into Drew McIntyre's chest and face. The impact. Oh my God, the impact. Drew's head snapped back into the steel cage with a sound that made grown men in the audience cringe. His body went limp immediately, sliding down the cage wall and crumpling into a heap in the corner like a puppet with its strings cut. The referee immediately called for medical attention. Drew wasn't moving. And Jacob Fatu? He just stood there, towering over Drew's broken body, chest heaving, sweat dripping, looking down at the Scottish warrior with an expression that said everything: "You messed with my family. This is what happens." Be honest with me, is Jacob Fatu the most dangerous man in WWE right now? Give me your take in the comments, ***. But here's where the story gets even crazier. Because what Jacob Fatu did to Drew McIntyre at War Games wasn't just about one man getting revenge on another. This was about re-establishing the Bloodline's dominance. This was about sending a message to the entire WWE roster. This was about Roman Reigns, Solo Sikoa, the Usos, and Jacob Fatu standing tall in that cage, surrounded by the broken bodies of their enemies, showing the world that the Bloodline isn't just still relevant, the Bloodline is unstoppable. Think about it. For months, people had been questioning the Bloodline, asking if they were still the dominant force in WWE, wondering if the cracks were showing, speculating about divisions within the family. Roman Reigns had been defending his position as tribal chief against challengers from all sides. Solo Sikoa was trying to prove himself as more than just Roman's enforcer. The Usos were fighting to maintain their legacy as the greatest tag team in WWE history. And through all of that noise, all that chaos, all those questions, the Bloodline kept one card hidden, one secret weapon in reserve: Jacob Fatu. And when they finally played that card at War Games, when they finally unleashed the Samoan werewolf, the entire landscape of WWE shifted. Because now every single superstar in the back knows what's waiting for them if they decide to challenge the Bloodline. They know what Jacob Fatu is capable of. They saw what he did to Drew McIntyre, one of the toughest, most resilient competitors in WWE history. If Jacob Fatu can do that to Drew McIntyre, what would he do to them? The answer? Nobody wants to find out. Let's talk about Drew McIntyre for a moment. Because despite everything that happened to him at War Games, despite the absolute destruction he endured at the hands of Jacob Fatu, you have to respect the Scottish warrior. Drew came into WWE with a chip on his shoulder and a point to prove. He was the chosen one who got released, rebuilt himself on the independent circuit, came back hungrier than ever, and clawed his way to the top of the mountain. WWE champion, multiple-time world champion, main eventer, legend in the making. Drew McIntyre has battled everyone: Roman Reigns, Brock Lesnar, Bobby Lashley, Seth Rollins, Randy Orton. The man has been through wars and come out the other side standing tall. But War Games 2024? This might have been the worst beating of Drew McIntyre's entire career. And that's not hyperbole. That's not exaggeration for effect. Drew McIntyre was demolished in that cage. Reports after War Games indicated that Drew had to be helped to the back, that he could barely stand on his own, that the medical staff was seriously concerned about potential injuries from that hip attack into the cage. Jacob Fatu didn't just beat Drew McIntyre, he broke him. Physically, mentally, maybe even spiritually. Because when you get destroyed like that on one of WWE's biggest stages, in front of millions of people watching around the world, in a match that's supposed to define your legacy, how do you come back from that? How do you look yourself in the mirror and tell yourself you're still the same warrior you were before? How do you rebuild your confidence when the image of Jacob Fatu standing over your broken body is playing on loop in your mind every time you close your eyes? Real talk, can Drew McIntyre ever recover from this, or is he permanently damaged goods now? Let me know what you think. Now let's address the elephant in the room. Where does WWE go from here? Because War Games wasn't just about ending a feud. It wasn't just about settling a score. War Games was about establishing the next chapter in the Bloodline saga. And Jacob Fatu? He's at the center of it. Think about the possibilities. Jacob Fatu versus every top name on the roster. Jacob Fatu as the enforcer who keeps the Bloodline at the top of the food chain. Jacob Fatu as the final boss that every hero has to overcome if they want to reach Roman Reigns. We could see Jacob Fatu versus Seth Rollins in a blood feud for the ages. We could see Jacob Fatu versus Cody Rhodes in a battle for the soul of WWE. We could see Jacob Fatu versus Gunther in a collision of unstoppable forces that would tear the roof off any arena. The Samoan werewolf has arrived, and he's not going anywhere. But here's the real question that should be keeping WWE superstars up at night. If Jacob Fatu did this to Drew McIntyre, what happens when he sets his sights on someone else? What happens when Roman Reigns points at the next target and says handle that? What happens when Jacob Fatu decides that you're the next example that needs to be made? Because make no mistake about it, War Games was just the beginning. Jacob Fatu's destruction of Drew McIntyre wasn't the end of a story. It was the opening chapter of something much bigger, much darker, much more brutal than anything we've seen from the Bloodline before. Let's talk about the aftermath. The days following War Games. The fallout. The reaction. Social media exploded. Wrestling fans around the world couldn't stop talking about what they had just witnessed. Twitter was flooded with clips of Jacob Fatu's hip attack. Reddit threads were analyzing every second of the beatdown. YouTube was filled with reaction videos of people watching Drew McIntyre get obliterated in real time. Jacob Fatu is a monster. Drew McIntyre just got ended. The Bloodline is untouchable. War Games was insane. The consensus was universal. Jacob Fatu had arrived in the most devastating way possible, and WWE would never be the same. WWE's creative team is probably scrambling right now, rewriting storylines, adjusting plans, figuring out how to maximize the nuclear heat that Jacob Fatu just generated. Because love him or hate him, respect him or fear him, one thing is absolutely certain: Jacob Fatu is must-see TV. Every time he appears on your screen, you can't look away. You don't dare grab your phone. You don't risk missing even a second because you know that violence could erupt at any moment. That's star power. That's box office. That's exactly what WWE has been looking for to take the Bloodline to the next level. And Drew McIntyre? Poor Drew McIntyre had to be the sacrificial lamb to make it happen. But let's not forget the human element here. Because behind all the violence, all the drama, all the storyline implications, there are real people involved in this. Drew McIntyre is someone's son, someone's husband, someone's father. A man who has dedicated his entire life to professional wrestling, who has sacrificed his body and his health for our entertainment. And at War Games, that body took damage that might haunt him for years. Professional wrestling is choreographed, yes. It's predetermined, yes. But the pain is real. The injuries are real. When Jacob Fatu launched himself hip-first into Drew McIntyre's face, when Drew's head crashed into that steel cage, when his body crumpled to the mat like a broken machine, that hurt. That was real pain that Drew McIntyre will feel tomorrow, next week, next month, possibly for the rest of his life. We celebrate the spectacle. We cheer for the violence. We demand more, harder, bigger, crazier moments. But we should never forget that real human beings are putting their bodies on the line to give us those moments. Drew McIntyre didn't have to take that beating. He could have said no. He could have refused to be the one who gets destroyed to make Jacob Fatu look like an unstoppable monster. But he didn't refuse. Because Drew McIntyre is a professional, a warrior. Someone who understands that sometimes your job is to make the other guy look like $1 million.